Hello there, and welcome back to War Thunder, to the second tank review in 2 days. And today it's about the new Italian light tank, if you will, or wheeled armored car. That is the AUBL 74 HVG, high velocity gun, I guess that stands for. And it is the second reward tank that you can get in the Heat Summer operation. And the question obviously is it good? Is it worth it? How do I perform well in it? What mistakes should I avoid? Obviously, I have a full rundown on the statistics for you to just put this thing into perspective. If you have equally battle rating tanks of other nations or you are familiar with them, that helps you to put things into perspective. But stats alone are not always everything. It is also about how to use the tank in battle, and therefore I also have some great gameplay footage for you. So without further ado, I think let's go into it. Let's begin with the tank review. As usual, I want to begin with the armor, and the question is, lol, which armor? Yes, that is an objective statement. It is rolled homogeneous armor on the hull. Yes, it's a bit angled, but it's only 8mm. In the worst case scenarios, if somebody is shooting you from slightly up, this is enough to kill you with a light machine gun. I'm not exaggerating, it has happened to me, but most of the time somebody just mows through here this part, even with a heavy machine gun. The turret though, there is a little bit of overlay going on, 30mm max, a bit of angling, but at the end of the day it will not really help you. The tank is also rather big, but it only weighs 8.7 tons, so very thin armor, relative, not small, let's put it that way. And yeah, armor, which armor? And then if you look at the interior, the X-ray, we can see we only have 3 crew members, of which 2 are very close by in the turret, and they're literally sitting on top of ammunition. And yeah, that's all that you need to know. As usual, the power pack is in the back of the tank. So when, again, with the BT7F32, it's not the armor, and it's also not the survivability of the tank. What else has the tank going for it? Well, in 2 cases, it is firepower and it's also mobility. When it comes indeed to the mobility of the AUBL 74 HVG, it is indeed a very mixed bag. While we have here the lightest of the light tanks with 8.7 tons, which at first looks like an advantage, we also have by far the weakest engine with only 160 horsepower, giving us a below average horsepower to ton ratio of 18.4. Now the next thing is that this is in fact a wheeled armored car, so that you have a lot of traction problems. I will talk about this in just a moment. But let's talk about the weight here, because very often if you move across the map, especially early game, you ran into obstacles like fences, like wooden barrels, etc, etc, and they slow you down very often. The heavier ones like a concrete fence pylon, they stop you dead, and don't talk about the wooden tank traps in the first place, because it just takes so long to run over them. So you have to machine gun them down if possible, or if not, you have to sacrifice one of your gun shells, and that is not just only costing you ammunition, but over time that gets expensive, and it gives your position away. Everybody knows where you are early game, then you get caught in the reload, then you die because of this. It's really annoying, especially in a city fight. The next thing is the horsepower to ton ratio of 18.4, which is, as I said, below average. And I represent here the 8.7 premium main battle tanks here at the very bottom of the stat card with the Type 74G Kai, which has nearly 19 horsepower per tons and is significantly heavier, so to just crush those objects that are usually in the pathway. And you might think, well, then I am at least significantly faster. Look at the stat card, it says 100 kilometers per hour top speed. That is true on the stat card, but let's talk about again the reality here in game. And in fact, on a normal map with the medium terrain everywhere, you're looking at a speed cross terrain of 30 to 35 kilometers per hour. That is terrible. You're beating the top speed on paper by quite a bit to any other tank except the Centauro, which is the other 8.0 tech tree equivalent or counterpart for the Italians. but you're not really speeding up because you have all this drag factor, you have the ground pressure, etc., etc. And if you go uphill, if you go over muddy terrain, if you go long distances, you just lose contact to your team, you slow down so much. So the only place on any given map where you can really go fast is in a very long, very straight line on a paved road, and then you are risking losing control over the wheeled armored car. So I highly recommend here the cruise control. And so you can see the tank has ups and downs, but mostly it is not really competitive. And as I said, you get up-tiered so often, like 90% of the time in my experience. So if you are then not even significantly faster or slower, in fact, than the 8.7 premium tanks, which gets banned everywhere in any map, then you see as a light tank with no armor, you have a little bit of a problem there, to be very polite. Then the reverse speed with 19 kilometers per hour is also not neck-breakingly fast. In fact, it is pretty slow, but still you can reverse at all. So it is not the most terrible thing that I have to say about this tank. But then also the maneuvering is really tricky, because if you run into an object, then you have to reverse and you have to steer, whereas with a normal tank you just can traverse. A normal tank is just so much easier to handle in War Thunder than a wheeled vehicle. So that is what I wanted to talk about, the mobility. Now let's talk about the business end of the tank. Let's talk about the firepower. And there, in fact, it looks a little bit better in comparison, because despite having a very unusual low caliber gun of 60mm, the OF high velocity gun at least carries enough shells with 38. That is a decent amount, that's good enough for any given battle. The reload is 6 seconds stat, so that gives you overall roughly 10% advantage, 10 to 12% advantage compared to the usual 6.7, especially if you look here at the Type 74G. A lot of the other autocannons, like the infantry fighting vehicles, like the Warrior, etc., they just have a superior rate of fire, no doubt about this, and also the Object 906 as an autoloader beats you in any given engagement with the reload. And at least that is not really that bad, but I wished it would be just a tick faster for the sacrifice in caliber. And the turret rotation speed, to come to the rest of the gun handling, with 30 degrees per second, it's not great, it's not terrible. Look at the Warrior with 60, look at the Sheridan with 40 degrees per second, and a lot of the other main battle tanks also share this turret traverse with you. Then let's talk about the gun depression, -6 degrees. Again, not the worst in this comparison, but it should be definitely better for all the sacrifices in mobility, armor, and also to a certain degree firepower. The gun elevation, on the other hand, with 27 degrees is comfortable. Then the elevation speed with 10 degrees per second is also not the best. Here the Warrior is again the best, but it is definitely manageable. And one thing that I have to point out, this tank, for its battle rating of 8.0, has probably the best stabilizer in the game. So you can pull off those amazing shots if you have good ping, if you have no packet loss, and if you are very good with leading shots, the stabilizer will not lead you down. On the other hand, one final thing to add, sometimes with the gun depression and etc., you're just about to click to shoot at the enemy, and then the gun kicks up for no apparent reason. I don't know if this is a bug, I don't know if I'm exceptionally unlucky with hitting rubble on the way or something like this, but this has happened to me quite often. So the gun handling is not the greatest, but definitely not the worst. Now let's finally talk about the ammunition. And the first of two shell types is the Auto HE. Now, it is really not the greatest HE shell that there is. It lacks penetration due to the TNT filler, due to the caliber, etc. I mean, it's reasonably fast for an HE shell with 1000 meters per second of initial muzzle velocity, but then that's about it. The reason why I mentioned this is because this tank has no hash shell, this tank has no heat shell. This is the only thing that you really have at longer ranges versus some troll potato trucks, and that is, in my opinion, a little bit of a drawback, but not that much, because the second shell type is the M300 APFSDS. That is the second and the last shell type that we have available on this tank. But top tier is all about APFSDS anyway, so it's not a big deal. Muzzle velocity with 1620 meters per second is really good, so it's really easy to aim at long range, and also the gun is pretty accurate. And then there is the penetration. At first it doesn't really look all that impressive with only 249 millimeters. That is less than some of the full caliber AP shots at this battle rating. Look at the 120mm guns, for example, on the Foch, on the Super C, and also on the M103. They have over 300. But this is a long rod APFSDS penetrator, so the normalization is positive, and we have 144mm at 60 degrees angles of attack, and it barely loses anything at up to 2 kilometers. We still can punch through 123mm of 60 degrees angled armor. That is the penetration that comes close to the German 128mm APHE BC round at point blank range. Very similar penetration values. So it is easy to aim, it is easy to hit the target, it is easy to penetrate because barely anything has armor in the first place at this battle rating, and you have then a rather quick reload of 6 seconds. The post penetration damage is not the worst, and also the price of 210 civil lines per shot is not the worst. So this shell is pretty good, and this is obviously what I use in 99% of all the cases. So now let's summarize this tank, and let's talk about how to play it. So first of all, this tank only on paper has a really good mobility. In practice, you struggle a lot with the terrain and your maneuvering due to the fact that wheeled vehicles are implemented the way that they are. So a lot of the tanks, most tanks, are effectively faster in a straight line over cross terrain, and that is a severe drawback. So you have to really have a clean driving style, avoiding all the obstacles in your way, always looking for a hard paved road, especially looking downhill, avoiding muddy terrain, avoiding going uphill, and also being very careful in city fights, because you know there are a lot of corners that you have to take. So you really have to be careful. The next thing is that if you make this tank work, it's really great, but you're not really extremely outstanding. Your firepower is limited to effectively APFSDS, but top tier is all about APFSDS, so no big deal. The rest of the gun handling is mediocre at best, except for the stabilizer, which is really precise, as well as the precision of the gun. Then you have practically no effective air defense, and you are very thinly armored, so you will die very easy even to cannon fire from aircraft and or from suicide crashes, rocket hits, and also nearby bomb hits. Your armor doesn't really offer you anything. It's merely there to keep the crew from falling out again, and that is not really that great. This sounds like a min-max tank, but there is too few minimums and too many drawbacks effectively. So it is a very opportunistic vehicle, and the best thing that I can say it is the long range capability, but it's not really a glass cannon, because that would mean that you have unlimited firepower effectively, and that is not the case, sadly. So while you have APFSDS and it's good enough in most cases, in some special cases it might not just be good enough, and then you are stuck in place. There is little room to maneuver, and it is not terribly tragic, but not excellent is very often not good enough for top tier meta of War Thunder, where you just face the flavor of the month, the flavor of the patch, and you have to always deal with the most party hard tanks SPAs, infantry fighting vehicles of the enemy, and that very often is good enough to kill you. So here, in this battle, I desperately tried to stay out of harm's way and to just position myself in such a way that I can put shells into the enemy. There were some lucky shots, but now I tried to get out of there and it took me long enough. Somebody shot behind me and I thought, oh my god, that's an enemy. This is why I was pinned down behind this building. And there you have your problems with maneuvering. And again, this concrete wall here completely, or brick wall, completely kills my speed dead. That was not me braking. That was me driving forwards with all that I have had. And it was not good enough. And that's a bit of a shame. So as we just trundle along here, we have also the problem that we cannot really use this ridgeline because of only 6 degrees of gun depression. You see, the stats of this tank by itself are not all that terrible, but how they work together are not really in this vehicle's favor. And sometimes you have to rely on people not being aware of you, like this one. So if you have all the time in the world, you can easily one-shot enemies, but do you really come across enemies like this very often? And here I tried a little bit of a mind game, because I was driving into the cap, decapping it, the enemy doesn't expect me from this direction probably, and I thought to myself, let's be fancy, let's be cool, and he indeed looks in this direction, and then my shell got misaimed, I misaimed, and so I got killed really easily, really quickly. Just in the front section of the tank. So as a final verdict, I think it is a cool reward tank. At this point in time, we have to thank Gaijin for not introducing a broken tank, a tank that is completely overpowered like the KV-220. But on the other hand, again, it is a potentially very fast tank introduced for a nation that already has this flavor. So it's also not a game changer, although a tank like this for the British, but also for the Germans, at a little bit of lower battle rating with a weaker cannon would be really a gap filler. So again, Gaijin has missed here the chance. On the other hand, since it is only a event reward premium vehicle, it is not really the most outstanding desire to have a tank like this as a gap filler, because it's available only once and only the most dedicated players will get it, because you have to get it for 10 out of the 12 potential tasks. So I think now let's have a look at this funny scene here. I was using here the magic road of Stalingrad and I was going here into this funny place, and the enemy didn't expect me here. The camouflage probably helps. I should have scouted the BMP-2, but then there is also an M60 driving by. But I was scouting that guy and was about to shoot him when I heard just yet another tank, and oh boy, it's an Object 120. And that was a funny scene that I just wanted to share with you at the end of the tank review. And there is another tank coming, not expecting me here, completely tunnel visioning, driving forwards. And again, I'm doing my thing with scouting and prioritizing the enemies. So that scene was absolutely hilarious. So as a final verdict, I think if you're really a dedicated player of War Thunder, this tank is certainly a nice thing. For collectors, it's out of the question to get this tank. Obviously, you need to have it, and it is there free to play to get it. Just with a lot of time investment. It is a full-fledged premium tank. It has the maximum civil line modifier for tanks of 1.4, which is nice. It also gets a good progression as a rank 5 premium. So this is a little bit of a compensation for the M60A1 DC Ariete disaster. So that is something that I have to point out. And in fact, it has this nice stabilizer, which got removed effectively from the DC Ariete, from the M60. So I understand why Gaijin has chosen to implement this tank at this time as a maximum reward for the Italians. At least that's one way of me interpreting the facts here. And that is the tank review for today. I hope you enjoyed it. So thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Let me know in the comment section if this review was helpful, if it is now helping you to decide whether to not go for this tank. And as usual, why not give this video a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the ways, in the skies, and on the battlefields of War Thunder.